A cold morning draped itself across the small-town library, the kind of morning where silence felt heavier than frost. Inside, among aisles that leaned with the weight of forgotten stories, the quiet librarian moved like a shadow teaching itself to breathe. Her name was Mara, though few ever used it. Most simply called her the librarian, as if the role consumed the person. She preferred it that way. It offered distance, space to disappear behind routines that never asked for anything more than order, stillness, and the soft discipline of care. The world outside had grown unpredictable, but here, her calm endured. Every morning she unlocked the doors precisely at 8, letting in the faint scent of dust warming beneath weak sunlight. The floors creaked in greeting. The radiators sighed. Mara arranged the returns, stacked the periodicals, and prepared the place for whoever needed refuge that day. She knew the regulars, the mother seeking quiet before a shift, the student wrestling with exams, the retiree who pretended to read while dozing beneath a lampshade glow. Yet on this particular morning, a new figure hovered at the threshold, an elderly man wrapped in a coat that looked older than the town itself. He stepped inside with a tentative shuffle, as though expecting the building to reject him. Mara watched him pause by the entry table, where a vase of wilted daisies leaned toward the floor. His eyes were tired, but not from age. They carried the kind of weight sorrow carves slowly over years. Mara had witnessed similar eyes on refugees passing through the region months earlier, people displaced by conflict she tried not to think about. But this man seemed different, quietly self-contained, almost apologetic for existing. He drifted toward a corner table, brushing his fingers across the spines of books he did not intend to open. Mara approached with her gentle steadiness. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, voice soft enough not to startle him. He flinched anyway, then offered a weary smile. "No, thank you. I'm only resting." He hesitated on the final word, as though it meant something far heavier than taking a seat. Mara nodded and left him to the sanctuary he sought, but the image of his trembling hands lingered with her. As hours slipped along, the old man remained motionless, except when he glanced toward the windows at the street beyond. Every sound, doors closing, a chair scraping, wind knocking against glass, made him startle. Mara observed him from behind the circulation desk, sensing fear woven into him like threads in fraying cloth. She had seen veterans behave this way, twitching at memories no one else could perceive. But he carried no insignia, no medals, no hints of former glory. Only solitude, stretched thin. When noon settled over the library, the man finally approached the desk, leaning forward as though gravity itself dragged his bones. "May I ask," he murmured, "if you have newspapers from the early years of the war?" Mara hesitated. "Which war?" His eyes flickered. "The first one in this region. Before everything fractured." She sensed he meant the conflict that had divided families long before recent unrest reignited old wounds. "We keep archives downstairs," she told him. "I can show you." Something like relief softened his shoulders. Down the narrow stairwell, light dimmed into a muted haze. The basement housed decades of brittle pages preserved in boxes labeled with neat handwriting from librarians long before Mara's time. She guided him to a table and set out several volumes bound in cracking leather. The old man reached for them with trembling reverence. "I'm looking for someone," he confessed. "Someone I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to." Mara's breath caught, not from fear but from the intimacy of pain laid bare. She understood grief that shaped a life silently. Hers lived in the absence of a mother she barely remembered. He opened the newspaper to a headline announcing the evacuation of a village Mara recognized. Photo spreads showed smoke curling from rooftops, faces blurred by urgency. The man traced one picture with a shaking finger, a rescuer carrying a child through wreckage. "That's him," he whispered. "I never knew his name. But I survived because of him." Mara leaned closer. The photograph, though grainy, depicted a young soldier looking away from the camera, as though refusing to be immortalized. The man's voice rasped. "They said he died later, before anyone could honor him." Something stirred inside Mara, an instinct she rarely allowed herself, curiosity touched by compassion. "Why look now?" she asked. His answer arrived as a breath. "Because I'm running out of time to remember properly." His words struck the dim room like a confession. He searched the archive for hours, flipping through pages with devotion bordering ritual. Mara stayed nearby, organizing boxes she didn't actually need to sort, simply to remain a quiet presence. She found herself wanting to shield him from whatever truth he feared discovering. Near closing time, the man suddenly closed the final newspaper and exhaled, defeated. "Maybe stories vanish for a reason," he murmured. Mara shook her head gently. "Stories vanish only when no one is left to tell them." Her certainty surprised even herself. He looked at her then, with recognition, as though seeing not a librarian, but someone who understood silence as survival. She offered him a warm cup of tea from her thermos, and he accepted with both hands, grateful for heat and kindness. As Mara escorted him upstairs, evening shadows stretched long across the library floor. The man paused at the entrance, gazing back at the quiet sanctuary that had held his memories for a few fragile hours. "Thank you," he whispered. Mara offered a small smile. "Come back tomorrow. We can keep looking." His expression softened with a faint hope of continuity. But outside, unseen by them both, a military truck rumbled down the street, halting near the square. Soldiers disembarked, their boots striking pavement with rehearsed precision. The old man stiffened at the sound filtering through the doorway. Something unreadable crossed his face. Fear, recognition, or both. Mara sensed the shift in the air, an impending tremor settling over the town like a warning. She didn't yet understand the reason, nor could she have predicted what would come next. All she knew was that the world had intruded upon her quiet walls, bringing with it the unsettling pulse of history moving closer. The soldiers advanced toward the library, and the evening held its breath. The soldiers' footsteps echoed down the street long before they reached the library doors, their synchronized rhythm shattering the fragile stillness Mara guarded like a vow. The old man, who had spent the day paging through ghosts, stood frozen beside her, his thin shoulders drawn tight, his breath held as though any movement might summon catastrophe. Outside, the last of the daylight fractured across their uniforms, turning them into silhouettes forged from authority and old storms. Mara felt a pulse thrum in her ears. Conflict had been drifting closer to town for months, but never had it crossed the threshold of her sanctuary. Until now. The soldiers entered in a triangle formation, their expressions guarded but not hostile. Mara straightened behind the circulation desk, instinctively slipping into the calm professionalism she wore like armor. The old man hovered inches behind her, trying to shrink into invisibility. The commander, a broad man with tired eyes, stepped forward. "We're looking for someone," he said, scanning the room with the precision of a man conditioned to assess threat before humanity. Mara's throat tightened. "This is a library," she replied quietly. "People come here for peace." The commander's gaze softened for a heartbeat. "So does he," he murmured, though he hadn't yet looked at the old man. When the soldiers' eyes finally landed on the elder, recognition rippled through their ranks like wind stirring tall grass. Their stiffness broke. One of them, young, barely older than 20, whispered, "It's him." Another straightened, reverence washing over his features. The old man stumbled backward, panic seizing him. Mara stepped instinctively between him and the commander. "He's done nothing wrong," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The commander raised a hand, urging calm. "We mean no harm," he assured her. "But we must speak with him." The old man's breath shook. Mara glanced back at him, offering a silent question. His eyes brimmed with dread and something else, resignation. He nodded faintly, a man surrendering not out of fear but inevitability. Mara stepped aside, though her heart protested. The commander approached the elder with a gentleness unexpected in someone bordered by guns and rank. "Sir," he said, "you disappeared decades ago. We thought you were dead." The old man's jaw trembled. "Perhaps I should have been." The young soldier stepped forward. "You saved my grandfather," he said. "He told us about the man who carried him through the fire, the one who refused to leave the wounded behind." Another soldier added softly, "Your story was told to every new recruit. You were the standard we were asked to rise to." The old man shook his head, tears forming. "I was no hero. I abandoned everything after the war. I couldn't bear the weight." The commander's voice lowered. "But you carried others when you could have run. None of us would be here without you." Mara felt the room shift, its quiet evolving into something sacred. The old man, the fragile visitor who had traced old headlines with trembling hands, was more than his sorrow had allowed him to believe. He sank into a chair, covering his face as memories surged through him like a broken river searching for shape. "I'm tired," he confessed. "I just wanted to remember one last time." His voice cracked. "I didn't know anyone remembered me." The commander knelt before him, a gesture that startled even Mara. "Sir, we came because we heard there was an elderly man searching the archives for stories of the evacuation. Your name was never recorded, but your deed never vanished. When someone mentioned an old man at the library looking for lost soldiers, we knew it had to be you." The old man swallowed hard. "I only wanted to thank the one who saved me when I was a child," he whispered. "I didn't expect to be found." Mara's chest ached. She had known he carried grief, but she hadn't realized he carried history too, untended, unspoken, eroded by the years. The soldiers exchanged glances, an unspoken consensus forming. The commander stood and addressed Mara. "We're not here to detain him. We simply want to bring him back to the memorial site. There will be a commemoration tomorrow. His presence would mean more than he knows." Mara looked at the old man, whose eyes flickered with fear and longing. "It's your choice," she said softly. "You can go with them or stay here." The old man's hands trembled. "I've hidden for so long," he murmured. "I don't know how to be seen anymore." Mara knelt beside him. Sometimes being seen is the only way to heal what's been carried alone. He met her gaze, and something inside him, a shutter long sealed, eased open. "Will you be there?" he asked. Mara hesitated. The world beyond the library frightened her in ways she rarely admitted. But she saw the fragility in his request, the way his courage flickered like a candle needing shelter. "Yes," she said. "If you want me to." He nodded, a small surrender to hope. The commander exhaled, relieved. The soldiers stepped back, giving the old man space to rise at his own pace. As he did, Mara noticed how the weight of years shifted on him, still heavy, but no longer crushing. He wasn't simply a lonely visitor anymore. He was a story that refused to die, a truth resurfacing after decades buried beneath fear and silence. As the soldiers prepared to escort him to temporary lodging, the old man turned to Mara one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me before they did." She offered a quiet smile. "You weren't invisible," she said. "Just waiting to be found." Outside, the night deepened, but the air felt strangely lighter. Mara stood in the library doorway as they departed, watching the silhouette of the old man framed by soldiers who walked not as guards but as guardians of a legacy he had forgotten belonged to him. The library behind her hummed with its familiar stillness, but she sensed everything had changed. The world had reached into her haven, not to break it, but to reveal something long hidden. And somewhere inside her, a question stirred like a seed tasting light for the first time. The morning of the commemoration arrived with a pale, reluctant sunrise, the kind that seemed to hesitate before spilling light across a world still learning how to breathe after a long night. Mara stood outside the library, her coat drawn close, watching mist drift over the square like faint memories refusing to settle. She had barely slept. Scenes from the previous night replayed in her mind. The soldier's reverence, the old man's trembling confession, the way history had risen unexpectedly from the quiet floorboards of her library. She wasn't used to being woven into anyone's story. She had always been the observer, the keeper of other people's words. But today, she was walking toward something uncertain, tethered by a promise she hadn't been able to refuse. The soldiers arrived in a pair of trucks, their engines humming low as they parked near the town hall. The old man stepped out carefully, assisted by the commander. He looked smaller in daylight, fragile as weathered parchment, yet something had subtly shifted in him, a steadiness growing where fear had lived. When he spotted Mara, his expression softened with relief. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, voice thin but sincere. Mara shook her head. "I said I would." She didn't add that part of her came out of duty, part out of curiosity, and part out of a tenderness she didn't know how to name. The memorial site occupied the far end of the square, a granite wall etched with names worn by sun and rain. Crowds gathered slowly, veterans with medals pinned to trembling chests, families holding photographs, children too young to understand but old enough to inherit stories. Mara sensed the old man shrinking as they approached, as though each step pressed decades of buried memory back into him. The commander walked beside him with quiet vigilance. "You're not alone," he reminded. A podium had been set up for speakers, draped in the flag of a nation that had fractured and mended itself more times than anyone wished to count. As the ceremony began, a hush fell over the crowd. Stories were told, accounts of courage, sacrifice, devastation, survival. But none mentioned the unnamed rescuer whose photograph the old man had traced in the dim archival light. Mara watched him carefully. His eyes glistened, but he stood still, absorbing every word as though taking attendance of the past. Then the commander stepped forward to the podium. "This year," he began, his voice resonant, "we honor not only those whose names were recorded, but those whose deeds lived quietly in the memories of the saved. There is a man among us today whose courage shaped the lives of soldiers who were not yet born when he carried wounded civilians through burning streets. For decades he vanished from history. But history did not forget him." The old man stiffened. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mara felt her heartbeat quicken. The commander looked directly at him. "Sir, we owe you more than words. We owe you truth. You were the one who saved the children of the eastern village during the First War. You were the one who returned for the injured when others fled. You were the one who shielded strangers with your own body. Your disappearance became legend. But today, the story lives again, not as myth, but as fact." The soldiers surrounding the crowd stood a little straighter. Some lowered their heads. The young soldier who had recognized him yesterday stepped forward and saluted him, voice cracking as he called out, "Honor to you, sir. Honor to the man who taught us courage." Others echoed the sentiment, their voices rising like a wave carrying years of gratitude. The old man's breath faltered. Tears slipped down his cheeks with the fragile grace of something long held back. Mara stepped closer, her presence a steady anchor. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, trembling. "I left. I abandoned everything after the war." She touched his sleeve gently. "You didn't abandon anything. You survived. And survival is not shame." The commander approached and offered the old man a small, velvet-lined box. "We would like to give you a recognition medal. It is long overdue." The old man stared at it, shaken. "I can't," he murmured. "I didn't do it for medals. I did it because someone had to." The commander nodded. "Heroes never seek recognition. But it finds them anyway." With trembling fingers, the old man accepted the medal. The crowd applauded, some softly, some fiercely, as though clapping back the years that had swallowed him. Mara felt something swelling in her chest, an ache mixed with awe. She had never witnessed a life reclaimed in real time, never watched a forgotten soul re-enter the world that had once praised him. After the ceremony, people approached the old man with gratitude, stories passed down through families, bits of memory, fragments of rumors now shaped into truth. He listened with humility, overwhelmed but present. Mara stayed beside him, quietly ensuring no moment swallowed him whole. At times he leaned on her arm for balance, as though trusting her presence as much as the ground beneath him. When the crowd finally thinned, the old man sat on a bench near the memorial wall, breathing slowly. "I never wanted anyone to see me as a hero," he said. "I spent years trying to forget the man I was." Mara sat beside him, the autumn air cool on her skin. "Maybe you weren't meant to forget," she said. "Maybe you were meant to heal." He stared at the names on the wall, his expression lined with sorrow. "Healing feels strange after so long." The young soldier approached again, hesitant. "Sir, would you tell me about that night? My grandfather tried, but he never could finish the story." The old man inhaled, steadying himself. "It wasn't bravery," he said. "It was chaos. Smoke everywhere. People screaming. The ground shaking. I saw a child crying for his mother, and I just moved." He paused. "Courage isn't something you feel. It's something you do because there's no other choice." The soldier nodded, absorbing every word as though receiving a sacred inheritance. As afternoon shadows stretched long across the square, Mara realized she had stopped feeling like an outsider. She had been woven into this moment, a witness, a companion, a quiet keeper of unfolding truth. The old man turned to her with a softened gaze. "I'm grateful you were there yesterday," he said. If not for you, I might have run again." Mara shook her head gently. "You came because you were ready," she said. "I only opened a door." He smiled faintly. "Doors matter." A breeze rustled the memorial wall, scattering fallen leaves at their feet. The day felt different than any Mara had lived, richer, heavier, quietly transformed. And though she could not yet name it, a new path began forming beneath the surface of her quiet life, taking shape with every breath the old man reclaimed. The evening after the ceremony settled over the town like a slow exhale, the kind that follows a long-held breath finally released. The square emptied, the flag stilled, and the memorial wall glimmered faintly beneath street lamps that flickered awake one by one. Mara accompanied the old man back toward the temporary quarters the soldiers had arranged for him, a modest guest room beside the town hall, quiet and clean, with a window overlooking the library as though fate itself wanted him tethered to the place of his rediscovery. He walked slowly, leaning on her arm when his strength wavered, but his steps were steadier than they had been the day before. Something inside him had straightened, though his body remained bent by age. "It was overwhelming," he said at last, breaking a silence that had stretched several streets long. "All those voices, all those faces. I thought I'd forgotten the world, but perhaps it only waited for me to return." His words trembled, not with fear, but with the fragile wonder of a man realizing he'd lived long enough to witness his own resurrection. Mara offered him a small, warm smile. "You didn't return alone." He looked at her then, with gratitude etched so deeply it seemed part of him. "No," he said. "I suppose I didn't." Inside the guest room, the commander waited, his posture straight but his expression soft. "I wanted to check on you, sir," he said, "and to thank you again for allowing us to honor you properly." The old man lowered himself into the armchair near the window. He looked exhausted, but his eyes held a flicker of resolve. "Commander," he said quietly, "there is something I haven't told you." Mara felt the room still. The commander pulled a chair close. "You don't owe us anything," he assured. But the old man shook his head. "I owe the truth, to myself if nothing else." He took a slow breath, each inhale sounding like it scraped against years of silence. "The night of the evacuation. I didn't save everyone." He was trembling again. "There was a unit of soldiers, your predecessors, cut off by debris near the river. I tried to reach them, but I couldn't. The fires were too strong. I carried the children first. And when I returned," his voice broke, "they were gone. And I have carried that failure inside my bones ever since." The commander bowed his head. "Sir," he murmured, "every survivor carries ghosts. But your actions that night saved dozens. No one in your position could have saved them all." "That's what they said afterward," the old man replied. "But I knew the truth. I knew that fear slowed me. That doubt kept me from running straight back into the flames. And his voice faltered. "I couldn't bear the praise they gave me. It felt stolen." Mara stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "Fear doesn't erase courage," she said softly. "And doubt doesn't diminish what you did. You moved toward danger when most people ran away." He squeezed his eyes shut. "The burden grew too heavy. So I left. I walked away from every voice that tried to call me brave." The commander's gaze was steady. "Yet you lived quietly, not harming anyone, not claiming glory, not distorting the story. That isn't cowardice. It's the mark of a man who took responsibility more seriously than praise." Slowly, the old man lifted his head, absorbing the words like a balm he had never known he needed. A sudden knock interrupted them. One of the younger soldiers peeked in, hesitant. "Commander, sorry, it's urgent." The commander rose. "What is it?" "The intelligence unit sent a message. The old border tensions flared again this morning. They're recommending an evacuation for vulnerable civilians in nearby towns. We might be deployed tomorrow." The old man inhaled sharply, memories flooding back with a force that bent his posture. Mara felt her chest tighten. The world outside had once again become a storm threatening to breach the quiet they'd begun to reclaim. When the soldier left, the room seemed to pulse with unspoken truths. The commander cleared his throat. "Sir, you may not want to hear this, but your presence here, the hope you represent, matters now more than ever." The old man shook his head. I am no symbol. You are, the commander insisted gently. You survived a war that tore this region apart. Your story reminds people that courage endures even in ruin. Mara watched the old man's hands trembling against the armrest. I don't want to watch another generation walk into fire, he whispered. I don't want to relive that night. You won't, Mara assured him. Not the same way. He turned to her, eyes wet. How can you know? Because this time, she said, voice steadying, you aren't alone. A silence fell between them, heavy, but no longer suffocating. Slowly, the old man nodded, letting her words settle like stones, forming a path beneath his feet. The commander stood. We're preparing a gathering tonight. A smaller meeting with officers and townspeople. It might help calm fears. If you're willing, sir, your presence would carry weight. The old man hesitated. And what would I say? Only what you already know, Mara answered quietly. How to endure. After the commander left, the old man remained silent for several minutes, gazing out the window toward the library. I wonder sometimes, he murmured, whether the stories left in that building are easier to face than the ones in my own mind. Mara smiled faintly. Stories wait. People need to be met. He chuckled softly, a fragile sound. You have wisdom beyond your years. I have shelves full of other people's, she replied. Later, as dusk bled into night, Mara walked with him to the town hall's community room. Officers and civilians gathered in a loose circle, their faces tight with worry. The commander welcomed them, giving updates about the instability near the border. Anxiety rippled through the crowd. Parents clutched children, elders exchanged weary glances. But when the old man stepped forward beside Mara, a hush fell that felt almost reverential. He swallowed hard, gripping the podium with shaking hands. I am not a speaker, he began, voice wavering. And I am not the hero some believe. I have known fear more intimately than courage. But I survived because others stood with me. And tonight, I want to say, whatever happens in the coming days, fear does not have to decide who we become. The room stilled, breath held. I once ran from my own story, he said. But I learned today that stories catch up. They find us when we most need to remember who we were meant to be. Mara watched the crowd soften, some teary, some still, all listening. And you, he whispered, scanning their faces, are stronger than you think. Not because you are unafraid, but because you will stand for one another. That is what saved me long ago. And it is what will guide you now. When he finished, the silence broke, not with applause, but with something deeper, a quiet exhale shared by every soul in the room. Later, Mara walked him back to his quarters beneath a sky smeared with faint starlight. You did well, she said. He shook his head. I only spoke truth. Truth, she replied, is often the bravest thing we can offer. As they reached his door, he paused, touching the medal pinned to his coat. Mara, thank you, he whispered, for helping me remember who I was. The night cradled his words. But Mara sensed the story hadn't finished revealing itself. Not yet. The real turning point, whatever shape it would take, waited just beyond the horizon, gathering its breath. Dawn arrived quietly, slipping over the rooftops in gentle strokes of rose and ash, as though uncertain whether the world was ready to face another day. Mara felt its hesitance echoed in herself. She stood at the library door before opening hours, the key cold in her hand, listening to the hush of the morning. The events of the past 2 days fluttered through her mind like pages turning themselves, each moment fragile, luminous, irreversible. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of books welcomed her, grounding her in the quiet she had always trusted. Yet even here, a subtle shift lingered in the air. The library was still the library, but she was no longer simply its keeper. She had been drawn into a story she could not shelve away. She spent the first hour arranging returns, letting the rhythm soothe her. But her thoughts wandered, to the old man, resting in his guest room, to the soldiers preparing for possible deployment, to the town holding its breath between memory and uncertainty. By mid-morning, footsteps approached. Mara looked up as the commander entered, his expression lined with fatigue. Mara, he said gently, may we talk? She nodded and led him to a table near the window. He lowered himself into the chair, hands clasped. We received new information overnight, he said. Tensions at the border eased. Negotiations resumed. It appears there will be no deployment, for now. Relief loosened Mara's spine. That's good news, she murmured. The commander nodded. It is. But the old man asked for you. He seemed unsettled this morning. I think he wants to speak before I take him to the Veterans Center. They can care for him long-term if he chooses. Mara froze. He wants to leave town? Only if he decides it's best, the commander replied. He's still uncertain. Mara closed the library temporarily, a rare, almost unthinkable act, and followed the commander across the square. The guest room door was ajar. The old man sat by the window, dressed, the medal pinned neatly to his coat. He looked smaller today, shadows beneath his eyes deepened, but his gaze brightened when Mara entered. I'm glad you came, he said, motioning her closer. She sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. You should rest, she said softly. He smiled faintly. There will be plenty of time for that. But there were things I needed to understand before deciding where to spend the days I have left. He turned to look at her fully. Mara, he said, voice warm but trembling, do you know why I came to the library that first morning? She shook her head. Not exactly. He exhaled. I came because I was ready to stop searching. I was tired of carrying memories that felt heavier than my body. I wanted someplace quiet enough to let my thoughts settle so I could fade without disturbing anyone. Mara's breath caught. Fade. He nodded. When no one remembers you, disappearing feels easy. But then you showed me kindness, something small, but powerful enough to interrupt a man's final intentions. Emotion tightened Mara's throat. She had not expected her presence to matter so deeply. He continued, you treated me like a person, not a ghost. And in doing so, you reminded me that stories, my story, still lived. His hands shook as he folded them in his lap. I don't pretend to understand why you bothered. But I am grateful beyond words. Mara leaned closer. You weren't invisible, she said. You were hurting. And no one deserves to carry pain alone. His eyes glistened. I thought my life ended years ago, he whispered. But these past few days, I felt it begin again, even as its final chapter approaches. The commander stood respectfully in the corner, allowing them space. The old man inhaled slowly. I've decided not to go to the Veterans Center today. Not yet. Mara felt relief warm her chest. Stay here, then. Stay in town for a while. You're safe here. He smiled. Yes. And more importantly, I am seen here. He struggled to his feet, and Mara helped him. Together, they stepped into the street. The sky had cleared into a soft blue streaked with pale clouds. The square seemed gentler today, as though the town itself recognized the turning of a long-dormant chapter. Walking slowly, the old man led Mara toward the memorial site. The commander followed a distance behind. At the granite wall, the old man paused. His reflection shimmered faintly in the polished surface, a face carved by years of silence now softened by truth. Yesterday, he said quietly, I spoke about endurance. But today, I want to say something else. He looked at Mara. Survival is not the same as living. I survived the war, but I did not live afterward. Not truly. Not until someone offered me gentleness without asking who I had been. Mara bowed her head, moved by the fragile honesty of his words. He touched the wall lightly. I used to think courage meant charging into flames. But yesterday, watching those people, feeling their gratitude, I realized courage is also letting oneself be loved again after years of hiding. A silence settled over them, deep and reverent. Mara, he said, turning to her, you opened a door for me. Now I want to open one for you. She blinked, confused. He smiled softly. You hide too. In different ways. Behind books, behind duty, behind the comfort of routine. But even quiet souls deserve to be part of the world. She felt her breath hitch, not out of protest, but recognition. His voice lowered. Promise me you won't disappear into silence the way I did. Promise you'll let life reach you. She swallowed hard. I'll try, she whispered. Trying is enough, he said, closing his eyes briefly as though savoring the moment. They remained at the memorial until the breeze cooled. Eventually, the commander stepped forward. Sir, if you'd like, we can arrange visits with surviving families. Many would cherish the chance to meet you. The old man nodded slowly. Yes, I think I'm ready for that. As they walked back toward the library, the old man stopped and looked at the building with an expression almost reverent. This place saved me, he murmured. Not because of the stories inside, but because of the one who keeps them. Mara felt warmth flood her chest. You saved yourself, she said. I only kept the door unlocked. He chuckled softly. Doors, he said again, matter. The commander offered his arm, but the old man shook his head gently. Instead, he steadied himself and walked the final steps alone. Mara watched him, pride and sorrow intertwining inside her. He was stepping into the rest of his life, however brief it might be, not as a ghost, but as a man reclaimed. Before entering the guest room, he turned back one final time. Mara, he said, voice carrying with surprising strength, thank you for giving an old hero the courage to return to himself. She felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for letting me witness it. His smile lingered a moment longer, then softened as he stepped inside. The door closed quietly. Mara stood in the fading light, the library behind her, the future unfolding gently at her feet. The world had reached into her quiet sanctuary, not to disturb it, but to remind her that stories, lived stories, were waiting beyond the shelves. And as evening gathered around her, she understood the truth the old man had carried across decades of silence. Some lives are saved not by grand acts of bravery, but by small, steady kindnesses that return forgotten souls to themselves. The town exhaled. The day dimmed into night. And Mara, once merely the keeper of histories, stepped forward into her own.